In February of 2005, the Wichita Police Department received a floppy disk in the mail, and they already knew who had sent it. The man on the other end of that package had been killing people in Wichita since 1974, 10 victims across 30 years, and every few years, a letter or a package would arrive just to remind everyone that he was still out there and still hadn't been caught. He called himself BTK, a name he invented himself and fed to the press himself, because the killing was never entirely the point. The recognition was just as important to him. But before he sent that disc, he did something that no one anticipated. He asked for permission. He placed a coded message in the local newspaper directed at the investigators following his case, and the question was simple: can a floppy disk be traced back to its source? The police looked at the message, and they made a decision. They were going to lie to him. They published a response in the same paper. No, a floppy disk cannot be traced. He believed them. He sent the disk, and that was the last mistake Dennis Rader ever made. To understand how this case arrives at that moment and why it took 30 years to get there, you need to go back to where it begins, because the way this investigation starts explains almost everything about why it takes so long to end. January 15, 1974, Wichita, Kansas. A family called the Oteros, father, mother, and 2 of their children, are murdered inside their home on North Edgemore Street. The killer had been watching them for days before he made his move. He cut the phone line first, came in through the back of the house, and used rope and his own hands. When police arrived, there was no obvious suspect, no clear motive, no prior connection between the killer and the family that investigators could identify. The FBI began constructing a behavioral profile, and this is where the first and most consequential failure of the entire investigation takes root. The profile describes someone on the margins, a drifter, a loner, likely unemployed, someone without stable relationships or a fixed address, the kind of person who moves through a community without leaving a mark. It was a reasonable hypothesis, given what they knew. It was also wrong in almost every meaningful way. The man who killed the Otero family that morning went home afterward, changed his clothes, and drove to work. His name was Dennis Rader. He was 28 years old. He had a wife, 2 children, a steady job, and a church he attended every Sunday. He was not living on the fringes of Wichita. He was woven into the fabric of it. And over the following 3 decades, as the investigation stalled and the profile hardened into assumption, Rader continued building a life that placed him further and further from any description law enforcement had of the man they were looking for. He eventually became a compliance officer for the city of Park City, a suburb of Wichita. His job specifically was enforcing municipal codes, going door to door, issuing citations for tall grass, unleashed animals, zoning violations. He drove a city vehicle. He carried a badge. He interacted with residents in a position of minor but visible authority. And by most accounts, he took the work seriously, sometimes to the point of being considered overzealous by the people he cited. And separately from that, he was elected president of his church congregation, Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, a role that put him at the center of his community in a completely different way, organizing services, representing the congregation, being the person people turned to. None of this was accidental. Rader read everything published about the BTK investigation. He tracked the profile the FBI was developing. He understood what kind of person they were looking for, and he made certain that his daily life contradicted that image in every visible dimension. The familiarity he built around himself, with neighbors, with coworkers, with his congregation, was the most effective shield he had, because it meant that the people closest to him had already decided who he was, long before any investigator thought to look in his direction. This is not a case where the killer got lucky and the police simply missed him. The invisibility was engineered, maintained deliberately, and it worked for 30 years. What makes this case genuinely unlike most others in the history of American criminal investigation is that Rader was never simply hiding. From the very beginning, he was communicating. In 1974, a different man was charged with the Otero murders, and Rader, unable to tolerate someone else receiving credit for what he had done, called a reporter and directed them to a letter he had hidden inside a library book. The letter contained details about the crime that only the killer would know, and it made clear that the wrong man was facing charges. He wasn't correcting a factual error out of some distorted sense of justice. He was reclaiming ownership. That compulsion to be recognized, to have BTK acknowledged as a real and specific person, not just an unresolved case file, drove him to keep writing over the years that followed. Letters went to police departments, to newspapers, to television stations. Some contained photographs, some contained items taken from his victims. Investigators brought in linguists, behavioral analysts, anyone who might extract a usable profile from the language and structure of the letters. And while the correspondence confirmed it was the same person each time, it never produced a lead that pointed to a specific individual, because Rader was careful in exactly the right ways. He varied his phrasing, introduced deliberate inconsistencies, gave investigators just enough to confirm his identity and not enough to locate him. Then, after his last known killing in 1991, he went silent. 13 years passed without a single communication, and many investigators quietly concluded that BTK was probably dead. What ended that silence was a book. In 2004, a true crime author published a detailed account of the BTK investigation, the failures, the dead ends, the profile that never quite cohered into a suspect. Rader read it, and something about being rendered as a cold case, as a chapter that had closed without resolution, was something he could not accept. Within months, he began writing again, and the pace was different this time. 12 letters in a single year, more than he had produced in all the previous decades combined. This escalation is the second point of failure in the case, and unlike the first, it originates entirely with Rader himself. The discipline that had protected him for 30 years, the patience, the control, the willingness to go quiet for years at a time, was always competing with something underneath it. And that something was a need for acknowledgement that grew rather than diminished over time. By 2004, he was in his late 50s, living the same quiet, structured life he had always lived, and the pressure of carrying a secret identity that the entire country had failed to unmask had become something he could no longer contain through ordinary life. He began making requests through his communications, asking whether certain methods of contact were safe, testing the reliability of the channel, trying to establish a kind of controlled correspondence with the investigators tracking him. And at some point, that dynamic began to feel to Rader like a negotiation he was managing rather than a trap that was slowly closing around him. He was mistaken about that. In February of 2005, Rader was preparing another package to send to a local television station. Before sending it, he wanted reassurance that the method of delivery was safe, and so he placed that coded message in the Wichita Eagle, asking whether a floppy disk could be traced. The detail that matters here is not the lie the police told him, though that was decisive. The detail that matters is what Rader did not know about the technology he was using. Dennis Rader was not someone with a sophisticated understanding of computers. His working knowledge of the technology had essentially stopped developing sometime in the mid-1990s, and he had no awareness of something that Microsoft Word had been doing quietly in the background for years, embedding metadata inside every document it saved. Not just the visible content, not just the text and the formatting, the provenance, the file's history, the name of the user profile under which it was last modified, the path of the machine on which it was saved. When investigators opened that document on that disk and examined the file properties, they found exactly that. Under the field marked "Last Saved By," a single word appeared: Dennis. The file path contained an additional reference, the name of an institution, Christ Lutheran Church, Wichita, Kansas. From there, the identification took very little time. Investigators cross-referenced the name against the church's records, found Dennis Rader, pulled his employment history, his vehicle registration, his address. Everything fit. The geography fit, the timeline fit, the access fit. On February 25, 2005, Rader was stopped in a routine traffic pullover near his home. He was in custody before he had fully processed what was happening, and the man who had spent 3 decades managing his exposure to police found himself in an interrogation room within hours of that stop. At some point during that interrogation, Detectives told him the truth they had been holding since the classified ad ran in the newspaper. Yes, a floppy disk can absolutely be traced. The reaction investigators described was not rage, and it was not the defiant composure you might expect from someone who had successfully evaded capture for 30 years. It was something quieter and more complete than either of those. The look of someone doing a calculation in real time and arriving at a result they cannot dispute. 30 years of careful construction, undone by a line of metadata he didn't know was there, in a document he sent voluntarily, after asking for and receiving assurance that it was safe to do so. The compliance officer had been caught by the fine print. Dennis Rader pleaded guilty in June 2005 to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He received 10 consecutive life sentences. Kansas had abolished the death penalty in 1994, 1 year before his last known killing, which meant execution was never on the table. He is currently 79 years old and remains incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility. When you step back and look at the full length of this case, 30 years, 10 victims, a constant stream of taunting correspondence, and a killer hiding in plain sight the entire time, the failure isn't located in any single decision or any single moment. It runs through the whole structure of the investigation from 1974 onward. The behavioral profile gave investigators a framework, and that framework became a lens through which every piece of evidence was interpreted. A drifter, a loner, someone the community wouldn't notice. It was a reasonable starting point, but it calcified into assumption, and once it did, it started functioning less like an investigative tool and more like a blind spot, actively directing attention away from the kind of person Rader actually was and the kind of life he was actually living. He understood that blind spot better than the people it belonged to. He read the profile, he understood what it described, and he spent 30 years making sure that every visible part of his life was the opposite of that description. The steady job, the wife and children, the church presidency, the civic role, the ordinary and slightly dull surface of a man with nothing to hide. What ended it was not a breakthrough in profiling or a development in the physical evidence. What ended it was the part of Rader that double life could never fully contain. The need for recognition that made him name himself, that made him write letters for 30 years, that made him resurface in 2004 because a book had described him in the past tense, and he couldn't accept it. That same need made him ask a question he should never have asked. It made him reach out, establish a channel, and trust an assurance that the people on the other end of it had every reason to give him falsely. The man who had spent his career ensuring other people followed the rules was caught because he broke the one rule that had kept him free for 3 decades. He made contact when he should have stayed silent. That is where it went wrong.